Hello everyone and welcome to the Green Man channel. I hope you're all good and well. So for this Saturday's premiere, I'm actually talking about three albums that were very special to me, I think, and still are pretty special to me at this point in time. They all came out in the year 2020, that terrible, dark year that we all had to put up with, I guess, and live through. But there were a lot of great albums that actually came out that year. Now, of course, there weren't as many releases as we might have otherwise expected. Many bands decided to postpone releases because of the pandemic, so they could later tour the album, so to speak, in later years. So actually it was in 2021 and 2022 when we suddenly got, an avalanche of albums that had been held up during COVID. And now, I look back, but I actually think the albums that did come out in 2020, there were some absolutely fantastic albums that did come out that year, and that some of these albums, the three I'm going to talk about, I have revisited a lot since then, which says that these are three albums that I really love. These albums did of course feature on my top 20 albums of 2020 list, and the top 10 albums list that I did as one of my first videos ever on the channel as well. So do check out either one of those lists if you want to get a more of a full comprehensive scope of what I was listening to in 2020. But these three albums I think are certainly particularly special to me and have been since they came out that year. The first album I'm going to talk about is Emma Ruth Rundle and Thou, and their release May Our Chambers Be Full, which was a collaboration album. It came out via Sacred Bones. And it was quite a short album, 7 tracks, around about 37 minutes in length, I believe. So it certainly didn't hang around, this one. It kind of delivered, and that was that. But the thing is, it didn't seem like a collaboration that I thought initially, whether I was a little sceptical whether it would work at first. Emma Ruth Rundle's music is very soundscapey. She delivers these kind of quite restrained but really beautiful nuanced vocals, I would say, that are quite kind of airy and breathy at times, but fit her brand of music absolutely perfectly. It's kind of folky, it's kind of indie, it's sort of ambient. And you mix that together with Thou, a doom metal band who do absolutely kind of sludgy, crushing doom metal with really hard riffs and screams and growls and all that sort of thing as well. So Thou actually were formed in Louisiana in 2005. And have a few studio albums behind them. Emma Ruth Rundle also does have a few of her solo works behind her as well, and one of which I absolutely adore. That's the album On Dark Horses, which came out 2 years prior to this year I'm talking about, 2020, and that came out back in, of course, 2018. But this album it's a collaboration that works incredibly well. Now, I am describing these albums as hidden gems, so for metalheads, perhaps this particular album isn't quite as much the hidden gem as, well, what the next one I think I'm going to talk about. But it is, to me, somewhat of still an underappreciated album in that year. I didn't hear it talk about much, nor did I see it appear on many end of year lists, though Kerrang, I think it did get to number 10 on Kerrang's top 50 list. And so it certainly made some impression there. But for me, it still didn't quite get the full appreciation I thought this album really deserved. I thought it was a magical collaboration. No pun intended, because there is a song I think called Magical Cost on the album. And it's just a really, really strong album for me. I mean, I think Out of Existence has that absolutely kind of slamming riff in it. But yeah, some songs you get them weaving in Emma Ruth Rundle's kind of airy, ambient vocal moments, one second, and then the next you just get crushed with the hammering, sludgy Thou guitar riffs. And it all blended together so well, unexpectedly so, and I thought this album was one of the best of that year and remains, well, in fact, I believe it was my album of the year as well, right? I may have to double check that. It was in fierce contest with Ulcerate, Stare Into Death and Be Still, and absolutely, for me, that album's a masterpiece, and I haven't changed my mind about that. That Ulcerate album was just another stellar release in 2020. But yeah, this one for me has been special to me since it came out, and it's one I regularly still revisit 3 years later. Now we move on to another album. I'm going to talk about Xenobiotic, a deathcore band from Australia. I say deathcore, they've got a progressive edge to them. They do like to use a bit of kind of keyboard and piano moments that kind of create an eerie vibe to their brand of deathcore. This album I'm talking about is Mordrake, and it has that beautiful artwork which was produced by Mariusz Lewandowski, the late Mariusz Lewandowski, who unfortunately died relatively recently, I believe. He was also behind, if you don't know, the Bell Witch Mirror Reaper front cover, which was frankly a stunning piece of artwork and highly suited to Bell Witch's album back in 2017. Going slightly off topic, going back to this album, this is an album with really kind of a lot of heavy riffs, really huge breakdowns, some of the best breakdowns I definitely heard in 2020. And TJ Sinclair is switching between his growls and his shrieks with relative ease as he sings each verse or each chorus. And there is a lot that this album offers. It also flows seamlessly track to track, as some tracks just flow into one another naturally as though it were a prog album. And it absolutely hits hard. I mean, there's songs on here like The Light That Burns the Sky. I think that was the second track on the album. Has this breakdown which is very Meshuggah-esque, but it's a real, tight, fantastically produced track. This whole album is, to be honest, I highly recommend that one. Mordrake by Xenobartic, an Australian deathcore band. I believe this was only their second album, sophomore. Should have done my research on that one. But wow, I mean, what a release from 2020. One that I remember listening to a lot in the early part of that year, and I've been back to it a lot since as well. Now, the final album I'm going to talk about for this video, for this premiere, is an album a couple of you, I think, or at least one or two of you have said in the comments that you thoroughly enjoyed when I mentioned it in my top 20 list of 2020. This is Warnings by I Break Horses. Yes, we're now jumping from deathcore to something totally different, but that's the Green Man for you. And this is an indie kind of pop album. Now, I think I called it a shoegaze album when I referred to it before. It is somewhat shoegazy. It certainly has a shoegaze mood, this album, I would say. And in fact, it was released under the label Bella Union, which was founded by Robin Guthrie of Cocteau Twins. Also, I think by Simon Raymond, who was also from Cocteau Twins. So there's this sort of dream pop link there. So yeah, but they have a lot of indie bands, psychedelic bands signed to them, all that sort of thing. And you can totally see that link there, and you get that feel and that aesthetic from I Break Horses, I think. The thing is, so I Break Horses are made up of Maria Linden. She's the singer and the keyboardist. And you also have Frederick Balk, who does percussion and drums in this band. And this album, though, it's very synthy, very synth pop. It has very cinematic kind of soundscapes, and very, very woozy sounding. I think was the way the Guardian described it, as woozy synthscapes. But to me, it has a lot of just really wonderful sort of emotive, moving moments throughout the album, just littered throughout. A lot of that is to do with, for me, Maria Linden's amazing vocals and her vocal delivery on this. So if you think of shoegaze type albums, you associate those with vocals that are generally underneath the sort of music, that are sometimes even a little flat, right? And you can't really hear them very well. That's where this album's a bit different for me, because Maria's vocals, I think, are quite clear. Yes, they're still kind of maybe a touch quiet at times, but they're really quite clear, and it adds to the overall beauty of the soundscapes of the synth and the amazing effects that are sort of strewn across this whole piece of work. Maria's vocals are absolutely gorgeous. I mean, there are just moments on this album where, it's just incredible. The melodies as well are another feature of Warnings that I think are also just quite outstanding on this album. That the songwriting's pretty good too, but the melodies are really wonderful. I think of the melody to Death Engine, and that's one of the later songs on the album, and that is really quite stunning to listen to. Baby, You Have Travelled for Miles Without Love in Your Eyes, I think, is another track, one of my favourites. Absolutely gorgeous track again. Open a Turn is another good song, I think. And yeah, there's just so much on here that is was eye-opening for me. The thing with this particular album, this third one that I'm talking about, it's probably my most played album now of 2020 at least. I mean, and it still grabs me every time I listen to it. It hits me. Great album to drive to or to walk to. I think I may have said that before, and I'll say it again. It just really is. It's kind of like toxic in the way it's quite sad, actually. But sorry, intoxicating, not toxic, wrong word, but intoxicating in the way it's pretty sad and melancholic at a lot of points in the album. But it's so dreamy. It's just so beautiful. So well executed, and as I say, Maria's vocals are just out of this world for me on this release. They really are quite something, and I think hopefully we get something else from this band soon, because they have become one of my favourite bands, certainly for the last few years. Yeah, there's some things I didn't know about them. I didn't know that they performed all the Chiaroscuro live in 2014 in Shoreditch in London. I'd have been there in a flash if I knew they were performing in Shoreditch in London back in 2014, and I knew them then. But I'm glad I found them at this point, particularly in that awful year, because that album was a beacon of light in an otherwise pretty dark time. So thank you very much all for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. And yeah, I think, there's 3 albums here that are quite different from one another. You've got 2 pretty heavy ones, but with a mixture of light and dark, I would say, with the Emma Ruth Rundle and Thou album. You've got a really heavy, crushing album there with Xenobiotic and Mordrake. And then you've got a much lighter affair with the I Break Horses Warning album, but every bit as good as the other 2, in my opinion. It's just different in its style. So thanks all again for watching. Until next time, I hope you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to drop a like and sub if you're new to the channel. Blah 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 blah. Bye for now.